it's a never-ending learning process. It's like life itself. And that's part of my philosophy, if you ask me. Why bonsai means so much to me is because life, sometimes we feel like suffering is something that we have to go through. But the truth is everybody suffers. Everybody suffers one way or the other. If you're not suffering right now, you will. Life is just like that. But what we do with that suffering and what comes out on the other side. So for a tree, taking it out of the pot and cutting its roots, it's not a funny thing for them. It's not fun. It's stressful. Somebody's cutting my roots if I'm a tree. But out of the suffering that the tree's going through, something beautiful is going to come out. Well, welcome to Small Town Bonsai. My name is Wilson Sanchez, and I started this about 3 years ago. Basically, my backyard is my nursery. We are registered as a nursery in the state of Florida. What you see here today is my little greenhouses. I have my greenhouses right here, which I use mostly during the winter for all the tropical plants. In this area right here is where I am developing plants that eventually will become bonsais. Over here in that area, I have the shaded area for some plants that don't need or don't do very well with full sun. I have junipers in this area, and mostly the plants that I sell a lot in festivals, farmers markets, and events like that. And in this very corner over here, that's basically my show area. That's where my plants that are almost fully developed are gonna be. To me, bonsai is an art, but it's also a therapy. For me, this is relaxing. This is what I do to keep my mind busy with positive things, positive ideas, good things. This tree, it's just a tree and me. I'm trying to create something with this tree, and that's what gives me that peace of mind. For me, bonsai is not just an art. It's, as I said, it's a therapy. So when I'm here with all these plants, I know it's hard work. There's a lot of sweat and that goes into this, but at the same time, it's what keeps me grounded. It's what it does. These trees represent the trees that are already at a bonsai level. They're still growing because, as you well know, bonsais are never really finished. When you get to a certain point where you're like, that's what I wanted, the tree's gonna keep growing. The tree's gonna do what it's gonna do, so you gotta keep working with the tree. But most of these trees are at the level that they deserve a bonsai pot, that they're becoming a more artistic, a more you're showing more of what the tree is supposed to be like. A pre-bonsai is a tree that when you go to a bonsai nursery and you buy a pre-bonsai, you saw something in that tree that probably nobody else have seen or noticed. And you say, you know what, it's like that plant is talking to me. So you buy that plant and you start working with it and you get something out of it. And what comes out of it, it's not just what the tree looked like, but also what you saw in it in your mind. It's a connection with the plant. So that's why you can see one tree and you have 5 people and they look at the tree and they have 5 different opinions of how the tree's got to look at the end. So in this case, this is what my trees look in my mind when I look at them. And you might have another bonsai artist come here and say, well, I would do this and would do that. And that's fine. That's perfectly fine. That's what it's supposed to happen. And a lot of times I listen to another bonsai artist. I like their idea and I follow those ideas. But a lot of times it is what I want to do with the tree. So you might have somebody that doesn't like a certain branch, but I like the branch. So who is the tree for? The tree is for your enjoyment. Are you trying to, like, if I make this tree And I say, I want to work on this tree because I want to compete. I want to compete in, I don't know, the BSF competition. I want to bring this to the show and see if it wins something. Well, now you're building a tree for the judges. You're going to follow certain rules and you're going to look at it from the perspective of somebody else, but that's not what I'm doing here. What I'm doing here is this is what I enjoy, and this is what I see, and this is what I want to bring out of the tree. It's my own perspective on them.
Kind of a Bob Ross. Right?
Kind of, yes sir, kind of. All kinds of stages, I guess, in the development of some of my bonsais. Like when I'm starting with something small, that at the beginning it used to be, it started as a cutting from a tree, and then planted it, developed it. This one has been wired once. It's a small little juniper. This juniper is trying to become a cascade eventually. Fairly small, but they don't never stop growing. My next step, they may go into a 1 gallon pot if they still need to thicken a lot and grow. I just let them grow, fertilize and water them, just let them go. After a certain amount of time, I'll put them in a pot like this. When they're starting to be more like a pre-bonsai. You look at a tree like this, you'll see better shapes. It still hasn't been wired, but you can look at it and say, hey, I could probably do something like this with this. This is what we would call a pre-bonsai here. So when you get this, you work it, you wire it, you shape it, and within a season or two, you're probably gonna put in a bonsai pot. It'll be a nice bonsai tree. Some are a little bit more developed, like this one right here. So once they're a little bit more developed, and of course, hard to compete with the weeds, but once they're a little bit more developed, then they go into bonsai pots. And this one has been wired once. You see how the foliage is nice and healthy. This tree is very happy right now, and we'll grow them like that. Now, if you buy a tree like this, then it's a matter of maintaining the shape. Every once in a while, trimming it, wiring it, make sure it stays where it needs to be. Even a smaller tree, something like this. And you can be creative. You see this, you look at this tree right here. A lot of people would look at that branch and think like, that's too long, I'm gonna get rid of it. And I looked at it and that's really long, that's really interesting. So I'm gonna make it different. I try to create another triangle there. So eventually that's what I'll see, like a bigger triangle, smaller triangle. But that's a nice little tree. But I do have, and I'm always honest with all my clients, that's my policy. I have 2 collections of that I sell. That's collection 1, and my own trees, collection 2. My own trees are not for sale. Those are for my enjoyment. It doesn't matter how much people offer me for them. They're just not for sale. It's what I like. Those are mine. So some of the ones that are most popular are this little junipers. They sell a lot. They're fairly young, but they're nice little trees, and you can still work with them, and if you take good care of them, they outlive you. These little trees live a long time. Well, I do have all kinds of varieties, because as you know, sometimes I gotta tell people the word bonsai translates into tree on a plate. So it can be any tree. A lot of people look at junipers, and I have to thank the Karate Kid movies for that. They look at juniper and they say, oh, juniper is a bonsai. No, juniper is a tree that you can work and turn into a bonsai, but you can make bonsais out of everything. And here I'm developing some of the bold cypresses. Most of these are from seeds. So we started with seeds. They've been here for 1 season. They've been growing really nice and healthy. Yeah, 1 season. They're very fast. Next year, I started last year. This year's 1 season. Next year would be 2 years. So they've been growing really nice and healthy. But this is what I was telling you about. Like, see, you put them in 1 gallon pots. let them grow, let them develop, and then get them thick. Ultimately, the hardest thing of bonsai really is to get those trunks to get thickened. Everything else can be done in just a couple of seasons. The foliage, the branching, placement of branches, that's really not that difficult. What's difficult is to get them from a thin little thing to a thick, nice trunk. So that's what you do with these. Some of these, in a year or two, I'm probably gonna put them in the ground and let them get really nice and thick. So that's part of the strategy also. Put them on the ground, let them get thick, and then you remove them when they're at the thickness you want, and put them in pots and start working with them and creating your bonsai. It is a patience game though. But I have a oh, right here is good?
Yeah.
Yeah. So as far as tropicals is concerned, I do love tropical. And the main reason is because I am originally from Puerto Rico. So when I started many years ago, bonsais, all I knew was tropicals. So I came to this area. I'm working with a lot of other stuff, but I still have my passion for tropicals. So I bring stuff like this, which a lot of people will recognize as sea grape, right? So these are little trees that grow really nicely. Over here, of course, during the winter, you have to protect them from the winter. I do have some, like this Brazilian rain tree. This one I'm developing. Hopefully I'll get more plants from it, from air layering. But it's developing a nice little trunk right there. Let's see, like the Barbados cherries, or cherries, excuse my southern accent.
Say it again.
Barbados cherries. These are from seeds also. They started as seeds. My dad sent me the seeds from Puerto Rico, and I started working on this, and look how, that's about 3 seasons and they already developed a nice little trunk from a seed. So I got things like this black olives right here. So you can see they love throwing roots into anything that's wet. And I have a lot of ficuses too. So the fire trees, we call them flamboyants in Spanish. Flamboyant tree, flamboyant, I guess. Cornicia royale, something like that. Those are this ones here in the back. You can see how, these guys are attaching themselves to the ground now. They're ready to be planted into bigger pots. But these are from seeds also. Look at those little trunks. Very red and yellow flower, yeah. So these ones they need to go into bigger pots to develop more. But of course, they throw the roots out of the pot when they have that situation and they start growing into the ground, which is okay. It's just that they're not in the right place for them to do that right now. I don't want them to be doing that. But yeah. So we're doing, pomegranates, of course. Something like this. It's another one of my pomegranates, and I'm developing a whole bunch of pomegranates over there. So these little guys grow like crazy too. And they produce flowers and fruit. Well, how did I start in bonsai? Many years ago, when I was still a teenager, probably 17, 18 years old, a friend of mine and I went to a little mall. And in this mall, there was a bonsai show. That bonsai show was, right in the middle of the hallway. There were probably about 25 trees. It wasn't that big. But when I walked in and I saw that, I've never seen that before. I mean, I was in martial arts all my life, but I never saw bonsai trees. I was fascinated by it. And this little old man, Don Benny, spent a good hour and a half talking to me. Probably an hour and a half. It's hard to remember exactly how much time, but I always thought that was significant because he must have been in his early 70s. And I was a teenager that for Puerto Rico, most of my friends liked salsa, merengue, Latin music, and I was a rocker. I had long hair, skulls everywhere, earrings. I looked like a typical rocker of the 80s. And so most people didn't want to talk to me that much because I didn't fit the mold. But he did spend a lot of time talking to me, and at the end of that conversation, he pulled out a card and he says, "Hey, our bonsai club was the Club de Bonsai del Caribe." That was the name, the Bonsai Club of the Caribbean. It was in Ponce, Puerto Rico. And he said, we meet on this day. If you want to come, you're more than welcome. You're invited. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go. So I went to that meeting, and they had a class, and they were very welcoming, pretty much like a Tallahassee club, very welcoming, excellent group of people. And at the end of the day, I was hooked. I was like, yeah, I need to go get me a tree. So I started going to nurseries and trying to find trees. I didn't know what I was doing. It was during the day, during the times that we still didn't wire. Wire wasn't known as much. We bended branches by using fishing weights. That's how we pulled the branches down. We never wired the trees to the pot because there was no wire to do it. Our soil was basically very, very different from the type of soils we use now. We used actually black dirt with river sand and peat moss. Right now it's, you have so many options, but during those days, that was it. And I had to go to a river to get my sand, and let it dry and sift it and all that stuff. So it was, it was different. It was very different. But of course, after a few years of doing that, what's interesting is that Don Benny, when I got my very first little tree, it was horrible, that poor little thing. If you were to look at it now, you'll be like, oh my God. But it was my first little attempt. And they were having that month a show at the Ponce Museum. They were going to have all these bonsai trees. And I, in my ignorance, I'm like, can I show my tree? Can you believe that Don Benny said, yeah, bring it. And they allowed my little tree to be in that show. And they gave me a participation prize. So I guess sometimes participation prizes do work. So because I really liked it. And of course, till this day, when I moved from Puerto Rico to the United States, of course, got married, had children, on and off. Every once in a while, I would go get a tree, but I had to move many times. So the bonsais I had in Puerto Rico, I left them there. My parents were supposed to take good care of them. My visit after that, they would all be dead because they didn't know how to take care of my trees. So I lost a lot of trees like that. But on and off like that until about 8 years ago, when I was diagnosed with cancer, Hodgkin's lymphoma. And during that time, as I was doing my treatment, when you're doing chemotherapy, you start feeling lonely and you start feeling all these negative things because my wife had to go to work, my kids had to go to school, and I'm by myself at home feeling sick, and all these negative thoughts start crawling into your head. And I was like, you know what? I need to do something positive. I need to do something that gets my head in a good place instead of in a bad place. And that's when I remembered, I love bonsai. Why not start again? So I talked to my wife about it, and she said, let's go get something. And we went to a nursery, we bought 3 plants. Mind you, being from working with tropical plants in Puerto Rico many years ago and coming to this area where plants are very, very different, I had no idea of what I was doing. I had no idea how to get the soil, how to make the mixes, where to get any bonsai pots. I was completely lost. And somebody told me about the bonsai club in Pensacola. And I said, you know what? I'm going to make a trip to Pensacola. And I did. And I went to the Pensacola club, and they were very nice. They were having some artists doing a presentation that day, fascinating. And I was talking to the president of the club at the time, and I told him that I was from Mariana, and he says, well, we're 2 hours away from you. Tallahassee's only an hour away from you. Why not go in there? I'm like, oh, there's a club in Tallahassee? What? So that's when I found out about the club in Tallahassee. And I started visiting. I visited once or twice, and then I joined, and I have learned a lot since then. I've, of course, benefited greatly from that experience, and I decided to take classes more professionally. So I go to DNL Nursery down in the Ocala Forest and take classes with David Cutchin down there. And of course, everything I learned at the club and with Les and with all of you guys, it's been a great experience. And about 3 years ago, I figured, you know what? This is my hobby, but I'm about to retire from the BOP. I used to work for a prison system, federal prison system. And I really wanted to leave the prisons. I really did. So I figured, what can I do? Well, I turned my hobby into this little business, small town business. And my main goal is to promote the art. I hope that people, by seeing my trees and by buying the first tree, they decide, oh yeah, I want to do this. And who knows? I may never be a fantastic artist, but maybe someday there'll be a great artist going around the world saying that their first bonsai they got it from me. That would be an awesome experience. The process of learning in bonsai. There is no such thing as finishing your learning process, because there's so much to learn. There's so many different plants, so many different styles, so many different ideas, so many possible creations. It's impossible to be at a level that you're. If you ever feel like, oh, I know everything about bonsai, you really haven't learned anything. When you realize that I can learn a lot more, I can really get into this, and it's hard to explain. How do you get to the end of the ocean? I mean, if you start swimming one side and next time you look, you're just surrounded by water. You can keep swimming. You might be the best swimmer in the world, but to get to the end of the ocean, not to land, but to the end of the ocean, that's what I'm talking about. It's overwhelming, but at the same time, it's an awesome challenge, because you can't really get bored with bonsai. There's always a different tree. There's always a different style, a different method. There's people that make bonsai with strings instead of wires. I have no idea how to start something like that. So if I ever feel I want to learn something different, that would be a great thing. It takes a lot of time to learn to wire properly, and to even after you've been doing it a few years, you wire something and you start feeling the tree, and all of a sudden you hear that clack. It's a never-ending learning process. It's like life itself. And that's part of my philosophy, if you ask me. Why bonsai means so much to me is because life does a lot of things to us. Sometimes we feel like suffering is something that we have to go through. But the truth is, everybody suffers. Everybody suffers one way or the other. If you're not suffering right now, you will. Eventually, it's just a matter of time. Life is just like that. But what we do with that suffering and what comes out on the other side. For a tree, taking it out of the pot and cutting its roots, it's not a funny thing for them. It's not fun. It's stressful. It's somebody's cutting my roots if I'm a tree. But out of the suffering that the tree's going through, something beautiful is going to come out. And that's how I see that bonsai should reflect in our lives. We go through a lot, but out of that, something beautiful should come out. So, if that makes sense. Yeah, kind of, yeah. Yeah, so that's why it's so important to me.